Welcome to episode 46 of the Distracted Driving Podcast. This one is called We Have to Let Ourselves Off the Hook Sometimes, which is good advice, I think. It's a phrase and some advice that comes up towards the beginning of our conversation here as we get into discussing briefly our own academic progress as students, me, Stephanie, and Jim. We were not always the best of students in all of our subjects, and so that's why James says we have to let ourselves off the hook sometimes. We're going to get into some of his apparently controversial positions that may have led to his rather tumultuous exit from USC, and we will end this conversation, first of all, kind of explaining what led to him writing the letter. If you didn't catch the previous episode, I make mention of the letter that Jim wrote entitled Why I'll Never Be Allowed to Teach at USC Again. I will link to it in the show notes on our website, distracteddrivingpodcast.com. And without further ado, I'm going to let you enjoy episode 46. We have to let ourselves off the hook sometimes with guest host Stephanie Van Ash. So your intent initially then was you came to this conclusion that, all right, I'm re-diverting money to do things that aren't having the impact that I wanted. So it sounds like you kind of felt like it was not a good use of those funds. You make the decision that, you know what, I can retire, so I'm going to. But your original decision, I believe, was you're going to retire but continue to accept part-time lecturing and teaching assignments until you were told that, no, I'm sorry, those offers no longer exist, which led you to write this letter called Why I'll Never Be Allowed to Teach at USC Again. So now your plan, which was, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but your plan was, okay, you're retired, but you're going to continue teaching at USC as and when, as your schedule allows. They've taken that away from you. But you, in exchange, I guess, retained the Emeritus title. So if I've got all of that correct, then what's next? How are you going to make a bigger impact given the current circumstance?
All right. Well, I'd say one of my goals in retirement was to affiliate with a think tank. Not necessarily in a remunerated position, but it's nice to have some institutional credibility, right? And there are a lot of think tanks out there whose work I like, and I've done funded work for the Reason Foundation before, and I might work with them. I like the work the Independent Institute does, and I like the work Heritage does, and Cato, and a long list of thoughtful places full of people that I'd like to be shoulder to shoulder with. Focusing on the same kinds of questions. So that's still in play, and that hasn't been withheld from me. Whether or not that happens for me depends on what I publish and how effective I am talking to these various groups about whether and how we might work together. And I don't think USC's decision has a great deal to do with that. I was open to teaching. The best part of the job has been the students. I don't mean to deprecate the rest of the job. It's just true that for me, the best part has been the students, and they've been, frankly, the most important relationships in my life outside my family have been with the students I've gotten to know and work with. So the prospect of continuing to teach had some default appeal to me. And there are specific classes where I think we do some good. I like teaching statistics because, especially to social science students, because they often organize their affairs to avoid as much math as possible. And yet they need tools for rationality and decision. And statistics, it took me a long time to get good at teaching statistics to people who don't like math. But after a couple of decades of practice, I did in fact get reasonably good at it, and I like doing it. And I really feel that I've imparted um, to them some tools that will serve them and the others that they do business with in any capacity. Um, I like teaching economics. Now, the economists might not call what I teach economics, but I would often teach engineering economy, which has a smattering of economics in it. It's really, those courses really tend to be about making decisions where the number of
Right.
alternatives is countable, right? Right. There are other courses where the number of alternatives is massively large, and that requires a different approach. But when you can really count the set of alternatives, it makes sense to compare them carefully in a standard framework. And, just the basic sorts of tools that Sean and I were trained into when we were students. So that has a lot of payoff too. I like teaching those sorts of courses.
I'm not afraid to admit that economics was the only class that I got a D in my entire life.
That's
You know,
because you did not have
that,
James as your teacher.
bless you, you're kind. Um, I'm willing to bet that D was a growth experience for you. Um, I did once get a C in Production Systems 2, taught by Bob Carlson at Stanford University. Not that I'm bitter in any way, or it stayed with me, but it,
Even though he
you
knows
know,
his
you
name,
got kind of
he
got to
knows
let
the
yourself.
professor's address, phone number, social security number.
It's all true. Um, it was a growth experience because um, we have to let ourselves off the hook sometimes. You know, we're all responsible, scholarly, thoughtful people who work hard and pay attention when we're in the classroom, regardless of which side of the lectern we're on. But if you're a student and you go to graduate school, you're going to take hundreds of exams during the course of that academic career. And even if you're prepared for all of them and they're
Not
all
in my class.
well constructed, right? Understood. I'm just it's a thought experiment, right? Um, the binomial probability of screwing up none of them is pretty small, right? Even if there's a
Yeah.
99% chance that you're going to do well on every one, the binomial likelihood of screwing up at least one is hundreds of times greater than the probability of screwing up none of them. So if a class heads south, you got to step back, be objective about it, and just let yourself off the hook, right? If you've done your share of the job, and life is like that in general. There are circumstances where you're going to apply yourself and it's not going to go the way you want, and it behooves you to understand why that happened. But once you do, that part of the job is over, right? You take the lesson and you apply it elsewhere. So forgive yourself for that D. I forgave myself for that C, even though it still embarrasses the daylights out of me.
I love your story there. It just makes me think about how college is like some of the beauty of college, besides the fun social stuff, is that it's really a place where students go to struggle, to grow, I mean, like really struggle. Like I came out of so many organic chemistry tests just
Mm-hmm.
sobbing because I felt like I got beat up by the tests. But at the end of the day, it helped form and teach me how to learn how to take failure, how to find and weave my way around through things that I'm good at, and how do I do things that I'm not good at, and really grapple with disappointment.
I mean, that's exactly what I tell students today because I share with them in our first class session an actual scan of my report card when I was I think a first or second year at Cal Poly studying electrical engineering, and my GPA was a
Mm-hmm.
1.77 because it turns out that I am not very good at electrical engineering. But I learned a hell of a lot
Well,
about so many other things.
I'm I'm confident. Stephanie, you outperformed me in Orgo. Orgo clarified whether or not I was going to go into medicine. I didn't. Um, the world comes in two flavors: organic chemistry people and physical chemistry people. Physical chemistry has got thermodynamics in it, so you can get your head around it. Orgo, they're just tar makers from what I can tell. So I wish them well, but it's if you slogged your way through that sequence, you're a better scholar, more focused, more disciplined than I am. Good work. And now I've
Oh, that's
gotten
very
completely
kind.
off the subject. Thank you. You said teaching. I planned on teaching. Yes. This conversation has established how much we all like the classroom. When things are going well, how much fun it is. So it's perfectly logical that I would want to retain that dimension of the job that I like so much. And both the School of Engineering and the School of Public Policy made offers to have me continue to teach some of the classes I was teaching. In engineering, it had been the senior capstone course, which is a different course than most students are used to. And it's a sequence, it's a year long, there's an external client, the projects are real, and it's as much fun as you can have standing up, frankly, to teach a class like that. So I was hoping to get back to that at some point. I didn't say yes initially when the offer was made to me because I didn't want to teach full time. And I said yes to the stats class that the public policy school had offered. So you retire. There's a cohort of people who are retiring. You've known them a long time because you're all about the same age. They're all colleagues of yours. So you're in touch constantly. And emeritus status is an honorific status. It's not something that's given by default. There is a vetting step involved, but it's meant to position the faculty member for a continued association with the institution, so you can be recalled to service. So it's possible to be retired faculty without being emeritus. But it's if you aren't offered emeritus status, it's kind of like getting a general discharge from the armed services, right? It's communicating a kind of deficiency. And I was, emailing my cohort back and forth, and people were saying, "I've got my emeritus status, and it's on to the next step." And everybody's in a good mood because there's this transition in their life occurring. And mine didn't come. It didn't come, and I was kind of curious. But organizations are big, complicated places, and it takes a little bit of time. And I had an appointment spanning schools, so there's a little bit of additional complication there. I wasn't really too worried about it. And then out of the blue, in the summer of 2022, the School of Public Policy contacted me and said, "We've decided to recruit a teacher who can make a longer-term commitment to the students." And this was odd because they had never asked me what level of commitment I was prepared to make to the students. And I would have been open to really whatever they wanted to do, frankly. So I thought, all right, this and the delay in the emeritus status are somehow connected, because this communication,
what we call a clue.
this clue came to me from a fairly high level. The information was conveyed to me in a kind of non-standard way, which made me suspect that it had been a non-standard decision. And so the best thing about treating people well over the years is they will respond to you if you ask them a question. And especially if you're retiring, and answering the question presents less risk. So I had some staff contacts in the university, and I asked them what was up, and they took me aside and explained to me what had happened. And there was this protracted discussion at surprisingly high levels within the organization about whether or not I would have emeritus status. And there had been some events that I summarized in the letter that Sean referred to. There had been a protest demonstration that had come about because I was never happy with the Obama administration's 2011 letter concerning their dear colleague letter concerning Title IX. I thought that it had been it had produced some very perverse results. It created a circumstance where a lot of people, both genders, but men primarily, were being accused of sexual misconduct and were being expelled from their institutions based on a rather flimsy process and a rather flimsy set of findings. There have been 250 plus cases of universities, of students who have been expelled from their institutions, who've sued their institutions on the basis of the quality of the process and prevailed in court. So that letter prompted the creation of an internal apparatus that didn't work very well and wasn't serving the interests of the students or the institution, frankly. And so I was critical of this and vocal about this. And this led to a protest demonstration by some students who were very fond of that letter and the, I guess, the objectives. They may have misunderstood that I didn't disagree with their objectives. We all ought to be um, safe from predatory actions by other people in our lives. And there's a role for institutions in trying to promote that outcome. But my concern was with the process and the quality of the outcomes that it was producing, which were poor. And that produced this protest demonstration. And that might have figured into the central administration's concerns as they were discussing what my continued relationship might be with them, if any. And the riots that occurred in 2020 following the murder of George Floyd, that was an unsettling time for everybody. But I was unhappy I'm here in Los Angeles. It wasn't quite the 1992 riots in terms of violence and property destruction, but it was not far off the mark, frankly. Um, and I didn't like the public policy responses to the disorder that was taking place. So I am a big fan of the rule of law. Government has an enormous job to do. That job includes setting the rules of the road, enforcing contracts. We can't expect that to be done privately. That's in government's bailiwick, and we weren't doing it. We weren't responding appropriately to the civil unrest that was taking place, and there was a vast amount of property damage. If you don't enforce contracts, you can't have exchange. Markets can't operate. The benefits of trade are withheld from everyone, producers and consumers both. And that deserved more attention than it was getting from the left and the right and from universities. Um, and I tried to draw attention to that aspect of this, which was at odds with the university's contention that systemic racism was the root of all of these evils, and that's where the focus of the institution should go. We had to root out systemic racism, despite the fact that in the 35 years I worked for USC, I've known one sexist on the faculty and zero racists. I have never detected any faculty member making decisions about his or her work that was predicated on an assumption about the race of the people they were working with. I did have a colleague who thought women did not belong in his discipline, but he eventually figured out that he was wrong. He figured out how the world was organized, and he mended his ways, and that was resolved. So um, it's hard to understand the central administration's focus on systemic racism when we bend over backwards to avoid racist behaviors. And talking about this really upset the central administration. So that might have figured into their decision that maybe we need a little bit less Jim Moore in our lives. But in the end,
It,
um, I did receive emeritus status, and it was not because of the senior leadership in the academic dimension. It was because of the general counsel. The general counsel said, "Look, you know, um, you're really violating your own standards of conduct here and your professed values if you do this. And that will create liability for you. If what you are really concerned about is you don't want him in the classroom, um, don't let him teach. There's no particular reason not to offer him this status." And so, I understand from my staff contacts that word went down to the School of Public Policy that I was not to teach, and to the School of Engineering that I was not to teach. And those opportunities were withdrawn, and they're entitled to make the the decisions that they think are best for their organization.
That's at their
It's their
discretion
job.
to choose who is going to teach, right?
Right.
I want to go back to something you said, though, a moment ago. Well, a couple of things. First of all, you said they came to the conclusion that maybe we need a little less Jim Moore. I think that's ironic because Moore is literally in your name. So I would disagree with them. I think we need more of Jim
Thank
Moore.
you.
But you said when talking about the Title IX stuff, and I think this also probably persists through some of the other issues that came up. You said there was a common objective, but the disagreement was on the process, and I think that's really at the heart of so much of our political and social disagreement today. If you can get people to just calm down a minute and actually talk about the specifics of what we agree and disagree on, the objectives, in my experience, are often the same or pretty close to it, but we just disagree on method. And that conversation is, of course, a big part of being able to get to that realization, which brings me to a question. So, academic freedom, you mentioned that in your letter. You talk about tenure. In fact, you have a line where you said, something to the effect of, what good is tenure if I can't talk about this stuff? I'm paraphrasing. So is tenure dead? By the way, I've been very critical of that in my own, mostly in my academic career as a student, because I was the recipient of many instructors that I thought should not be so. The unintended consequence of tenure is that you end up with people that maybe aren't very good at their job, but they get to stay, which I don't think was the objective of tenure. But here's an example of where, it was supposed to protect you, and as you said in your letter, you could have stayed, but you would have just been on the sidelines. So where are we with tenure? What are your feelings on it now that you've gone through this? And there you have another cliffhanger. That is the end of episode 46. And I'll just reiterate that the unintended consequence of tenure is something that I have struggled with for a long time. I never understood tenure from the time that I first encountered it. I could probably do a whole podcast on the university professors that should not be, based on my experience with their teaching. But you will get to hear James Moore's thoughts on tenure in episode 47, which is coming up, depending on when you're listening to this, either right now or next week when it gets released. Thank you for listening and watching. I hope you're enjoying this conversation with Emeritus Professor James Moore and enjoying the guest hosting from my business partner, Stephanie Van Ash. And I will mention very briefly right now that Steph and I do have a new company. It is called Lead Out Loud. We offer leadership development workshops, really intended and engineered for engineers. These are workshops for people that are great at engineering, that want to be better leaders, more confident leaders, more effective leaders. So you can check that out and find out more information about Lead Out Loud at lolworkshop.com. You can also go to distracteddrivingpodcast.com to leave any comments you have on this or other episodes. And as usual, thanks so much for supporting the show. We'll catch you on the next episode.